And welcome everyone, this is Dimitri here. And today we are going to make a video about RPC calls. So what's an RPC, Dimitri? RPC are remote procedure call. Basically, it's the protocol that allows a computer program to request a service from a program located in another computer in the network. If we see that from the DayZ perspective, it's the communication system that allows us to communicate between the server and the client. And this is one of the things which is most important when you do modding and most in particular scripting, as you often want to communicate between your interfaces with your actual code on the server side. So in this tutorial, we're going to see how to use the community framework RPCs, as they are easier to work with and modder friendly in a way, as it doesn't require to uh, create your own RPC ID, and it will make it more stable and what's the word for that, and compatible with other mods, because the vanilla RPC use IDs, integer IDs, and if you happen to have the same ID as another modders for another RPC, it will collide the two and create issues. But with Community Framework RPC, this doesn't happen. So that's why we're going to work with that today. So let's get to it. So for our first case, we are going to explain a bit more about the RPC documentation, the function that is used to create them, the function that is actually being called, and the function that is used to send the request for that particular function to be triggered. So in order to create an RPC, you need to create it on the game startup. So it needs to be initiated by the game. This is why we advise to create them in mission gameplay or mission server, because those two classes are singleton, which is something, if you don't know, is a class that, let's go to the definition. It's a design pattern that restricts a class to have only one instance. So an instance is like an object that is being created from the class template. And the singleton allow only to have one particular object of this type. So for the mission gameplay and the mission server, those both are singleton. And when you create RPCs, it is usually where you're going to create them. So if we go back to that function, the add RPC is something you're gonna have to use on the game startup. It contains some parameters. The first one is the one you need to use, which is the unique name of the module working on. So it should match the one you have set up in CFG mods. So CFG mods, for example, CFG mods, if you choose that, if you choose, let's call it tutorial RPC, I'm gonna rename everything to tutorial RPC. All right, so this will be the RPC name for of the mod name. This will be the first argument I'm going to use. The second one is the function that I'm going to use that will be triggered by your RPC. So it will either be on server side triggered, client side triggered, or both. I recommend to only do one or the others. Having one that works on both can be complicated to handle for you and for your brain as well. So to start, just work with one or the other, but don't worry about it if you don't understand everything right now. Just explaining things out loud, but we're going to work on an example soon. So just to continue, we have the instance where that function will be actually called. And this instance will be also a singleton where you need to create it. So I don't know, we'll see a case later. And then we've got single player executed type, which is the variable that allow you to define where the function should be triggered, either on server or on client. So that was for the add RPC. We're going to see example just after that, so it makes more sense. Just after that, we have the RPC function. So the function that is actually triggered when you request an RPC, when you send an RPC request. So it contains a few parameters such as call type that gives the information about where the function is triggered, so client or server. Then we've got the params read context, which is the information that are passed by the RPC. Then you've got the player identity, which is the sender player that actually trigger it. So for example, if you're on the server side and you're like a player is connecting to the server, there's a function that is triggered when someone is connecting, and you can actually get that player identity out of the player. So from that, you can send an RPC directly to that player so you can get data. So that's just an example. And finally, we've got the object, which is also something you can use to target an object within the RPC that has been sent. Let's keep going. Like I told you, we had the function that is used to create the RPC. Then we have got a function that is triggered by the RPC. And now we've got the function which is the send RPC. So this function is used to actually send the request. So we can trigger the function of our choosing. For the parameters, we use the mod name as referred for the RPC we created. Then we've got a function name. So the function is actually created and triggered by that RPC. Then we send the parameters. So it can be variables, data, everything we want to send. Then we've got the guaranteed boolean, which is something it must be set to true to say that, yeah, we want to send it. Then we've got send to identity. So this can be either be set to the identity of the actual player we want to send that to the client, or if we want to send it to everyone, then in that case it needs to be null. One of the other thing is if you send an RPC from client to server, you don't have to define the identity because the player is actually already on the client, so the server will know who's sending it. So don't worry about that. And send to target, it's if you're working with objects, but most of the time we're working with the player base, as players are the things that triggered our RPCs. So now that we've seen globally how it works, let's get to the first example. Let's do our first exercise. So in order to work with RPCs, what we're going to do first is we're going to trigger RPC based on a user event. And that kind of event will be when a player is actually pressing a key on the keyboard. This will trigger a RPC that will be sent to the server. And more specifically, it will trigger the function on the server side that will receive the data communicated from the client. So in order to do that, we are going to create a new mod. So for the people that is actually members of my courses, you're going to have to be using your template. For the others, I advise you to do this kind of the same, having your own mod setup environment and then work from there. Basically create a simple mods and play it on your server. That's all I can tell you to do. Or you can also join the membership if you want and get access to that template, which will make your life way easy. So we're gonna copy the template. We're gonna paste it in our project. Oh, we actually already have one. I'm gonna remove it. We're gonna paste a new one. We're gonna rename it to We're gonna rename it to player tutorial RPC. All right. What we're going to do is we're also going to rename the mod inside source, which is also going to be tutorial RPC. So that will actually be the mod name. So if we go inside, you're going to see you have script with free game for world 5 mission, config.cpp. So that will be our mod. And the other are just scripts that will allow you to work efficiently. All right, let's keep going. Let's open VS Code. All right, I'm already open into that. For those who have not, you go to project, tutorial RPC, you select your folder, and then you're there. So first of all, we are going to define what we need. as I told you, we are going to work with CF, which is community framework that is actually have the CF RPC framework. So we are going to add it thanks to our little script that add directly mod to the workshop into our project for making it easier. For the others, just make sure that when you start your mod with the another server, make sure to have CF on. In our case, we're going to look for CF and we are going to add it. Also going to add PPP as it's easier for testing. Perfect. And then just quitting. We make sure we have both CF VPP. Perfect. So for that part, it's good. Let's keep going. Then config.cpp. We're going to rename all template mods with tutorial RPC. And we replace. Perfect. So now we have our setup. So currently we're not going to use game script or world module. We're just going to use the mission. We can keep it for now, but just so you know, you can remove the 2 previous modules as we're not going to work with it if you want. So we're going to work with 2 classes that are the instance singleton for the client and for the server. Mission gameplay handles all client event and all events based on the client side version, and mission server handles everything on the server side. The mission, when player logging, data received from the client, everything. And we are going to use both to play with RPCs. So if we go back to our example, which is this one, okay. So we, like I told you, we're going to make allow player to send an RPC when pressing the KK in game. So the server will retrieve the result in the RPC function created called end function kpressed. So we already have the code, so it's pretty easy enough. We're going to copy the first part and we're going to paste it in mission server. So we can simply remove that, replace it. And that's good for that part. We can do the same for mission.gameplay as this is the second part. And I will explain later what we just did. So we replace. Okay, so as you remember previously, I told you that in order to create RPCs, you need to use the add RPC function. And you need, first of all, to define the mod name, the one that you're going to use and that is defined in your config.cpp, your CFG mods. So let's make sure it matches. So actually currently it doesn't, because what we use is tutorial RPC. So we're going to select that and we're going to change it to tutorial RPC. So make sure that when you work with the mod, for example with Threader Plus, I call this Threader Plus because my CFG mod is Threader Plus. For your mod, you use your mod name. That's how it works. Then we've got the function keypressed, which is the function name that we're going to trigger with our RPC. So it's actually this function, and it has the arguments given, explained previously earlier, with code type, parameters, player identity, and object. So with this, we actually create our RPC. We create it in the mission server constructor, which is the class the method that is called when we instantiate the class. As we don't do it ourselves, it's the game that does it on its own, the server. And this is exactly why we need to create it. We need to create it on game startup, and this class is actually doing that. It is created early in the process. It's the first thing that is created in order to have the server working. So for that part, we're good. And if I want to add another, let's say for another purpose, I can simply, add as many as I want. Just so we're clear on the 2 other arguments, this refers to the instance of this class. It means this is this actual class. So this function, I'm telling it that because of this, it will be in this class. If I'm giving something else, another instance of a class, first of all, it needs to be a singleton. So it must only exist in one in your whole script code, not 2 instances, 1 instance. And then I'm giving him the information about the call type, single player execution type. It means it will be executed on the server because I use .server. So it's created on the server side. If I want to create a function that will be triggered on the client, this little part needs to be created in mission.gameplay in the constructor. But we'll see that in the second example. So let's keep going. Let's make a little bit of a cleanup. Perfect. Oh. And the print. So here we created the RPC. Then we've got the function that is actually going to be triggered when we send the RPC request. So it has, like I said, the arguments, and then we've got the code inside. But before we go to the code, let's see how we can trigger this function. As you remember, we have to use send RPC. Yeah, we have to use send RPC. So send RPC is actually called on the client because we ask the user to do something, and pressing its keyboard is not something that will happen on the server side because the DayZ, the software, the DayZ, your game, when you start a launcher, it's actually on your computer where it interacts with the keyboard. That's the client side. I'm just trying to explain it simply where it is because you need to understand that DayZ works with two things, the server and the client, and both need to communicate it through RPCs. That's the whole point. So this method is actually already included in mission.gameplay because it uses override, meaning, first of all, it means that it wasn't created in mission.gameplay, it was created earlier in a class that is the parent of mission.gameplay. And second of all, it already exists, so we need to use support.onKeepers, which means that everything that is created on this function by DayZ will still be called. And then when it's called, we'll call our code, which is a condition if key, which is an integer, equal keycode.kck, meaning if the key equal k, because it's an enumeration of integer that is linked to the k letter, key on your key. And if it's called, then it will send the RPC. So if we take a look at the first argument, if you remember in our tutorial, we said that first needs to be the mod name. It must be the same thing as the other RPC, which is also the same thing as the CFG mod name. So let's change that. If you remember, it still needs to be tutorial RPC. So I change it. Okay, so I'm good. Then I need to have the function I want to trigger, which is exactly this one, well defined. So on that part, I'm good. And then I need to specify the data I want to send. So what I'm going to send is a simple K, a K later. So I know what I pressed. So for that, I'm going to create the parameters by using new param. If I want to send more than one parameters, I change the number in front of at the end of parameters. If I want to send 2, I can say 2. Then I need to specify the types that I want to send, which is a string, and let's say an int. And then I can define inside the opening and closing an integer, for example. It's just an example, but we're not going to do that. We should put it back to normal. And then, if we remember again the cheat, we can actually need multiple things, but we are not going to use them as we are working from the client, and this can remain at its default value when it's sent from the client, as we already have those information. But we'll see a more deep, another kind of way to write it from the server side on the next example. So I'm all set for this part. Let's check the other thing. Yeah, we need to explain this method. So the first thing is we make a condition to check if we are actually on the server side. We need to make sure that when this function is triggered, it's triggered only on the server. So usually it should do what it say, what we define it to say. It should be called only on the server part. But in case it's not, and it's called also on the client for some reason. Then we make a check so we can return if we're not on the server part. So by checking the type and making sure it's not equal to call.server, we return, so we don't go more in our method, we just leave. That allows us to make sure that everything that is called after that is actually right. Okay, let's keep going. After making sure we're on the server side, thanks to that, we're going to try to retrieve the data we sent, which is the K letter. So for that, we're going to create the param1 string, which is what we sent, and the variable which will be called data. And then we make another condition to make sure we managed to read the data, because if we didn't, then the process we're going to do next will be wrong. So in order to make sure it's right, we check if the data is managed, it's read correctly. And if it's not, once again, we return, so we don't proceed with the wrong data. Finally, when we have both of this information, we're going to do a last check that I didn't do, which is making sure that person that sent the data still exists. And we have multiple ways to do that. We can write if sender, oh, okay, it's different from null, then, come on, tab 9, then return. This will make sure that what's coming next, because we're also using sender, will be right. Because if sender, for some reason, doesn't exist anymore on the server side, it would create an issue, because we are actually trying to call a method from this instance. And if this instance doesn't exist, it will create an error in DayZ and could crash the server or just print the crash log, which also can happen. So we have the first test, and that's all we need. So now we can get the data. So we define a string that contains the response from the client. And to get the data out of a parameter type, we need to define data, which is the name of the variable, dot parameter and the parameter index of which data we want to retrieve. In our case, we only have one, so we define one. But if we had two, like earlier with an int, we'll have wrote something like that for the second int response equal data.parameter 2. So that's an example of what happens if you have two. Let's go back at one. And what's the final line? It's the print. So we're going to print something in the script log. And we're going to print this information. It sounds weird because we use person1, person2. This is actually a method called string format that allows us to add variable data directly to the string. So if I use string format and I use person1, that will be the first argument of our method format, which is the sender.getName. So this will actually be the name of the player that pressed the keyboard. And then person2 is the second argument, which is the response, which is the K that I'm hoping to receive. And this will allow us to print the final response, which will be my name or username, press the key, and then which key it pressed. So now we have everything. We did have set the mods we need to start our project. So what we're going to do is we're going to build our mod that we just did, and we're going to make sure everything works. So let's see, just so you see. If everything works, then it will just start. If it doesn't, then we'll see what mistakes we make, because mistakes happens a lot. All right, seems to be good. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do a little cut, as I have to start the server, no, the client. And to start the client, for the people that have the template, you just press launch DayZ, and then it will start the game with the actual environment you set up. For the others, then you have to also add the mod you just created into your as a local mod in the launcher, and add start your game through your local server with CF and VPP. All right, see you in a bit. All right, welcome back from the game. I just want to warn you that I figured out that I made a mistake while I was doing the function. So if you have started your server, you may notice it didn't work, as this sender was actually set to unequal, which results that if the sender, which is the player, if the player was actually on the server, we were never gonna print in the log. So in order to fix that, you just have to change it to unequal to double equal, which will make it work. So thanks to that, you can see what's going on. And if you are a bit more interested, what you can do as well is you can add a print on the client side. So that way you can see the action that the function on the client side is triggered, and you can also see on the server side that it's actually triggered. So for example, this is my client side log. So what I did with the template is I just right click on the show client script log, I right click, I started it, and this is actually what I can see. So now that I'm in game, if I press K, you can see that it actually working. I press multiple times, it works. So now let's take a look at what's happening on the server side, and you can see that it sender response every time I pressed. You see once more, another. So it works as it's supposed to do. So in order to make it work, as you probably started the game and noticed it didn't, you have to rebuild the PBO, start over, and check. And it should work, buddy. So I hope you like the first example. Now we are going to deal with the second one. See you in a bit. So for the second tutorial, we are going first to destroy all the games, so we don't have anything else. So you shut down the server, you shut down the client, and you should be good. So we are going to go back to our cheat sheet, and we are going to go to the second example, which is sending an RPC from server to client. So what kind of purpose can that be interesting to do? For example, if you have a config file that you want to send to the client when he joins the server, there is actually an RPC that you need to send from server to client so the client can have the server data, which is often used in multiple mods such as Trader Plus. When you have all your price config that the server admin did, well, you need to send it so every player that connects can get the prices for each product so it can be shown in the menu. And that's one of the interesting purpose of actually sending data from server to client. So in this example, we're going to do that. We're going to send a little bit of data from server to client. So let's take a look at the example. As you can see for this one, we are going to create the RPC on the mission.gameplay. And we're going to have another function that will be our function that will be triggered when we send the send RPC request on server side to the client. And obviously on mission server, we're going to use a method which is from the game, which is called invoke on connect. This is a method that is called when a player joins the server. So thanks to that, you can get the player instance of the actual player that is joining and its identity, which is one of the things we are most keen to have, as it's the identity that will allow us to trigger the RPC and send in directly to that specific client. So let's get to it. First of all, we're going to create the method here. You know what? We're going to do it by hand. This time will be more fun. So for the first one, we still have that. So we're going to keep it. So that way we have both systems in one hand. So on mission gameplay, I'm going to add the constructor class of mission gameplay. Okay. Perfect. Now we are going to use get RPC manager. And we are going to add RPC. First thing, it's the mod name, if you remember. So the mod name is tutorial RPC. Second thing we're going to put is the name of the method of the function that will be triggered. Then what do we have? We have the information about the instance it's going to be called. We're going to call it in this instance in mission.gameplay. And finally, we have the single player execution type, which is going to be client, as we need it to arrive on the client side. So let's create the function that will trigger our RPC. So in my example, I call the function invoke data response. So let's do that. Then if you remember, we have call type, etc. So because I'm a lazy man, but every developer are, I'm just gonna copy it because it's exactly the same. So this will make it an RPC function. And now we have already the creation. So we need to actually define it here. So this RPC will be linked to our function. And we need to add something inside. But first of all, we need to trigger this function. So if you remember, we have to go to mission.server and we have to add a new method, which is already existing, which is called override, because it's a function that is already existing from mission.server, and it's called invoke on connect. All right. Okay. So because it's an override, we need to use the prefix super to call back the vanilla content of this method. And now we can add our actual code, which is the RPC sender that we're going to send. So send RPC. Oh, nice of him. So this is good. Then we need to trigger. We're going to remove that. We are going to remove this and this as it's wrong. Don't trust tab 9 all the time. It does strange things with DayZ. So we need to trigger this function, and we define it, the destination function is triggered. Then if you remember, we have to define the data that we send, such as this. So parameter string k. So let's copy it. So what are we going to send? Let's send, what did I use in the example? Still string. All right. Well, in that case, we're going to use a string. True and identity. Perfect. So let's use a string. String, the message will be the player. The player, or let's say a player that to the server. All right, simple message, simple information. Then we're gonna use true, as it's the what is it called again? It's the guaranteed part, and then we need to use send to identity. We need the identity part, which is exactly this. So now we have finally all we need to have the send RPC method ready. So with that, we're going to trigger the method that we want to work with. This method will be function in raw data response. So first of all, as before, we need to make sure we are actually on the client. And if we're not, we just skip the next part of the function. Then we need to create parameter part. Let's call it data. And don't remember, the param is a string. We need to specify for param type of the data. And then we can make the if ctx.read data. And actually we need to make sure that if it doesn't read the data, we return, as we don't want to proceed our process if the data we received is wrong. And the sender is actually null, so we don't need to care about that. So we're just gonna retrieve the answer, which is the response in our case, and we're gonna do data.param1, and finally we're going to print it. So print response. Perfect. Just so we can debug easier, what we're going to do as well is we're going to add a print on the server side, say connected to server. That way we know when someone actually connected to the server. Perfect. Let's build and see if we made any mistakes. I'm gonna just remove the previous scripts I executed, and I'm gonna build. Coffee. Best thing in the world, right? What I'm checking right now is the console. All right, server started, so I will cut once more and we'll see back in game. See you in a bit. And here we're back in game. So now I opened the script log on the server side and the script log on the client side. Right now below you can see that there is the script log from the server side. It actually prints the connected to server print we actually said. So we got into the method that we were actually sending the RPC. Now if we go to the other script log, which is client ones, you can see that we got the response, which is a player connected to the server. So we successfully managed to send data from server to client. And this concludes the RPC tutorial. I hope you guys liked it, and if you're interested about it and wants to progress and learn more stuff about modding and scripting, I advise you to join my membership in Coffee and join the True Survivor membership. That will gives you additional tutorials, a lot of project making, and the next one is actually going to be a respawn money. So feel free to join if you want, subscribe to the channel, and see you in a bit, guys. See you.